Robert Williams moved the mop in long, even strokes across the marble lobby of Morgan Tower. The floor gleamed under the overhead lights, still wet enough to catch reflections. He'd been working this building 14 months. Knew every corner, every elevator bank, every security camera blind spot. Not because he was planning anything, because thoroughness was the only way he knew how to work. The clock above the security desk read 12:22. The elevator doors slid open. Elizabeth Morgan stepped out, phone pressed to her ear, heels clicking sharp against the marble. Robert recognized her from the portrait hanging beside the security desk. 33 years old, CEO. Built Morgan Financial from nothing into something the press valued at $900 million. The financial websites used words like visionary and ruthless in the same breath, as if those qualities naturally belonged together. She was moving fast, not looking down. Robert shifted his cart 3 feet left to give her clearance. Standard courtesy. The yellow wet floor sign stood upright exactly where it was supposed to be, 3 feet from the wet section, highly visible. Elizabeth's heel hit the damp marble. Her leg went out from under her. She caught herself against the wall with both hands, sharp intake of breath, fury already forming behind her eyes. The phone clattered from her grip and slid 6 feet across the floor. In the silence that followed, she looked up. Her eyes found Robert, traveled from his face to the ProClean logo stitched above his breast pocket, to the mop in his hands, to the yellow sign standing 3 feet to her right, then back to his face. "Are you serious?" Her voice cut through the lobby like a blade. Robert said nothing. He'd learned years ago that silence was often the most powerful response available. "I almost fell." Do you understand what almost fell means? Do you understand the liability that represents in this building? She gestured around her at the marble, the glass, the portrait of herself hanging on the wall. "You're supposed to have the main floor done before midnight. That's the arrangement. That's what this company pays for." The sign was up. Robert's voice was quiet. It was always quiet. "I don't care about the sign. I care about the fact that my floor is wet at midnight and I nearly broke my—" She stopped, picked up her phone, examined it for damage with the focused anxiety of someone whose device was a lifeline. "What's your name?" "Robert Williams." "Robert," she said it like a name being crossed off a list. "I'm calling ProClean in the morning. I want a different crew assigned to this building. I want people who understand how to do a job without creating hazards for the people who actually run this place." She looked at him for another half-second, not as a person exactly, as a problem that had been noted and would be dealt with. Then she walked toward the revolving door, phone already back at her ear. Robert watched her go, picked up the wet floor sign she'd knocked sideways in her rush, set it back upright, wrung out the mop, continued cleaning. What Elizabeth Morgan did not see, what she could not have known because there was nothing about a ProClean uniform that told this story, was the small metal object that shifted in Robert's chest pocket when he leaned forward to straighten the sign. Military issue. The kind not handed out at routine ceremonies. The kind that doesn't come in a box with a certificate suitable for framing. The kind pressed quietly into a man's hand in a room with no windows, with instructions about what it means and more specifically about what it must never be allowed to mean publicly. He'd carried it for 11 years. Not out of pride. He carried it because his son had found it once on a shelf in the closet and asked what it was, and Robert had said it was something from when Daddy used to have a different job, and Daniel had held it with both hands and looked at it with such serious, careful reverence that Robert had never been able to put it back on the shelf. So it lived in his pocket, closest to his chest. A secret the marble lobby had no interest in knowing. He finished the ground floor at 1:15. Rode the service elevator to the second floor thinking about Daniel, asleep in Margaret Ortega's spare room, probably curled around the stuffed dog he'd had since he was 2, thinking about the pancakes he would make in the morning, thinking about nothing else. He did not think about Elizabeth Morgan, did not think about the call she intended to make. The second floor was open-plan offices, long rows of desks, glass-walled conference rooms, the residue of a full workday left by people who assumed someone else would address it. A ceramic mug, a wrapper beside the trash can, a sticky note face up on the carpet reading, "Call back." Robert collected these things without judgment. The job was to restore order, return a space to the neutral condition from which tomorrow could be built. He understood that as its own form of dignity. He'd always been good at being unseen. In the field, invisibility had been a technical skill achieved through training, discipline, and an almost inhuman capacity for stillness. Here it was simply a social fact, a uniform, a cart, a job title that caused most people's eyes to slide past him the way eyes slide past furniture. He'd spent months being troubled by this before reaching the understanding that the trouble itself was the wrong response. Worth was not established by the attention of people who did not know you. Worth was established in the private accounting of your own conscience. Tallied daily, never falsified. Robert Williams knew exactly what he was worth. He'd earned every cent of that knowledge in places these marble floors could not imagine. He had no way of knowing yet that by the time morning arrived, Elizabeth Morgan would have far larger problems than a wet floor. He got home at 3:49 in the morning. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building constructed in 1962 and renovated just enough at irregular intervals to stay technically habitable. The hallway smelled of other people's cooking, cumin, garlic, the ghost of someone's fried fish from earlier in the week. Robert had long since stopped noticing. The smells of a working building, a building full of people who came home tired and fed their families and went back out and did it again. He did not find it depressing. He found it, on his better nights, beautiful. He showered first, always. He would not bring the chemical smell of cleaning products into the space where his son slept. A small thing, a private rule. But Robert ran his life on private rules because he'd learned that structure was not a cage, but a skeleton. Without it, everything collapsed. He showered, changed into a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, sat for 20 minutes at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee in the specific quiet of a city at 4 in the morning, which was different from all other quiets, deeper, more honest. The city at 4 a.m. was not performing for anyone. On the table beside his coffee was a drawing Daniel had left for him, a habit the boy had developed 6 months ago. Drawing pictures the night before that his father would find when he got home. Tonight's drawing was in crayon, green and blue and a determined orange. It showed two figures standing side by side on what appeared to be a hill with a large sun overhead and something in the foreground that Robert studied for a full minute before identifying as a dog. They did not own a dog. Daniel wanted one with a ferocity of desire that surfaced at regular intervals in conversations that always ended the same way. "Someday," Robert always said, "when we have a yard." Daniel always accepted this. He trusted his father's somedays in a way that made Robert feel the full weight of every promise he had ever made. He folded the drawing carefully, placed it in the kitchen drawer where he kept all of them. 31 drawings in that drawer. He knew the exact count because he had never thrown a single one away and never would. He slept for 4 hours, woke at 9 without an alarm. His body had kept military time for so long that it no longer required external instruction. Went down the hall to collect Daniel from Margaret Ortega's apartment. The boy was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table eating toast and explaining something at length about dinosaurs, his small hands moving with enthusiasm, of a child who had recently acquired new information and could not understand why the entire world had not yet been informed. Margaret listened with the patient attentiveness of a woman who had spent 30 years in a classroom and genuinely loved the architecture of a child's mind. "He's been up since 7, she told Robert, the tone of a report, not a complaint. "He has opinions about the Cretaceous period." "Dad!" Daniel was off the chair and across the kitchen in 3 steps, wrapping both arms around Robert's waist with the full commitment of a child who had not yet learned to moderate physical affection. Robert put his hand on the back of his son's head, held it there for a moment. "Mrs. Ortega said the T-Rex might not have been the biggest one. Did you know that? There's one called Spinosaurus and it might have been even bigger, but we don't have the whole skeleton, so we're not completely sure." "I did not know that," Robert said. "I'm glad you told me. I think we should go to the museum, the natural history one. They have real fossils." "Saturday," Robert said. "I'll check the hours." Daniel looked up at him. "You always check the hours." "That's because it's always worth knowing." The boy accepted this with a small nod of philosophical satisfaction, went back to his toast. Robert met Margaret's eyes over his son's head. She smiled at him with warmth that had nothing to do with sentimentality and everything to do with recognition. She knew what it cost a man to do what he was doing. Her late husband had understood that particular arithmetic. She asked for nothing and gave freely, and Robert had never in his life known how to adequately account for that kind of grace. He made pancakes when they got upstairs, their ritual, the anchor of the week's irregular tides. Daniel sat on the counter, a privilege granted only on pancake mornings, and supervised the process with grave responsibility, reporting on the bubble formation in the batter as if conducting scientific observation. Robert flipped them without a spatula when Daniel wasn't looking, the way his own father had once done. "Dad, how did you do that?" "Practice. I want to learn. Someday, when your hands are bigger." Another someday. Another promise the drawer would eventually need to hold. After breakfast, while Daniel watched the nature documentary he'd already seen 4 times, Robert sat with his phone and looked at the ProClean scheduling portal. His stomach was quiet but attentive, the way it had been trained to be, the way it registered threat without broadcasting it, the way it held information without reacting. There was a message from Timothy Clark, his supervisor, sent at 7:53 a.m. The message said, "Call me when you get a chance." It said it in a tone, even in text the tone was discernible, of a man who has been leaned on and does not enjoy it. Robert knew what the call would be. He'd known since 12:30 in the morning when Elizabeth Morgan walked away from him in the lobby. He had simply not allowed himself to process it until now, because there had been a child on his counter describing bubble formation, and that child's world required Robert to be fully present in it, without the weight of what was coming pressing down on his shoulders where Daniel might feel it. He stepped into the bedroom, called Timothy Clark. Timothy was a decent man, caught between competing obligations. Robert understood this and did not hold it against him. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Elizabeth Morgan had called ProClean at 8:15. She had not spoken to Timothy directly, but to Timothy's supervisor, Ronald Lewis, who had then spoken to Timothy. The word used had been reassigned, not fired. Reassigned. Timothy said this as if the distinction mattered. Robert let him believe that it did. "I understand. Thank you for telling me. I'll figure it out." He did not say anything about the wet floor sign that had been in plain sight. Did not say anything about the time, about the schedule, about the fact that the lobby had been started on time and the sign had been placed correctly and a grown woman in a hurry had simply not looked where she was walking. None of that would change anything. None of that was the point. The point was that a person with power had made a call, and a person without power had absorbed the consequence. That was the oldest equation in the world, and Robert Williams had no illusions about it. He sat on the edge of his bed for 3 minutes after the call ended, doing the math. Rent was $1,420. Daniel's school lunch program was covered, but after-school care was $210 a month. Groceries, utilities, the minimum payment on the credit card he'd been slowly paying down since he left the service. All of it arranged itself in his mind with brisk clarity. The numbers had their own weight and shape. He could pick up extra shifts with a different ProClean route, the one that covered the office parks in the suburbs. It paid less per hour, required a bus at 4:30 in the morning. He noted this and set it aside as a viable option. Moved on. He went back to the living room. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch, which happened sometimes when the early morning hours caught up with him. His shoes were still on. Robert unlaced them, set them on the floor, covered the boy with the blanket from the arm of the couch. He stood there for a moment looking at his son's sleeping face, at the complete and uncomplicated peace of it, at the way Daniel's chest rose and fell with the easy confidence of someone who had never spent a night wondering whether the rent was covered, and felt, as he always felt in these moments, the fierce and private satisfaction of a man who has built something worth protecting. He did not know yet what Victor Hale had put into motion, did not know that the same powerful hands that had quietly orchestrated Elizabeth Morgan's professional unraveling had also, by no coincidence, reached down into the subcontracting chain and identified a particular janitor at Morgan Tower as a useful point of pressure. He did not know that he was not a random casualty. He did not know that he had been chosen. What Robert knew, in the bone-deep way that men who have lived at the edge come to understand certain truths, was that the world had never promised to be fair, and that fairness was not the point. The point was what you did with what you were given. His father had taught him this, not in a speech but in the accumulated testimony of a life lived with steadiness and without complaint. His father had been invisible too, the way certain good men are invisible, the ones who show up without being asked, who endure without editorializing. Robert had understood, watching that man for 23 years, that the inheritance he was receiving was not money but something far more durable, a way of standing in the world, a way of absorbing what came without breaking your posture. He thought about his father sometimes, on the nights when the apartment was very quiet and the arithmetic of survival pressed down harder than usual. Thought about the barber shop, the smell of it, the sound of the old radio behind the counter, the way his father's hands moved over a customer's head with the same attentive care, whether the man in the chair was a city councilman or someone who had walked in with his last $10. Dignity given freely, dignity asked for in return. Robert had inherited those hands, not the barbering, but the care. He expressed it differently, in a clean floor, in a folded drawing, in a shoe unlaced and set gently beside a sleeping boy, in the absence of complaint, in the steady act of showing up. But the metal in his pocket pressed warm against his chest, and some old trained part of him, the part that had survived things that would have broken men made of lesser material, had begun, without his conscious instruction, to pay attention. 2 days later, Kenneth Scott called. Robert was at the library on Halston Street with Daniel, the boy working through a reading worksheet his second-grade teacher had sent home. Simple exercise. Match the word to the picture. But Daniel was taking it with the seriousness he brought to most things. Brow furrowed, pencil moving with deliberate strokes. Robert sat beside him, left hand on the table, right hand around a paper cup of library coffee that was barely better than no coffee at all. He read the words his son circled, said nothing when Daniel got one wrong. Just waited, because Daniel almost always caught his own mistakes if given enough silence to hear them. The phone buzzed in his pocket. Kenneth's name on the screen. Robert stepped outside to the library steps. The October afternoon was mild, a few people on the sidewalk, traffic moving slow on Halston. "Brother," Kenneth said. His voice had not changed in 4 years, low, unhurried, carrying the specific weight of a man who had seen enough of the world to understand that panic was a luxury and that facts delivered cleanly were a form of respect. "Kenneth, when you get a minute, something you should probably know about." Robert had learned a long time ago that when Kenneth Scott used those words, you stopped what you were doing and paid attention. "I'm listening." What Kenneth told him in the next 11 minutes changed the shape of everything. Victor Hale, through a network of shell entities, held a controlling interest in 3 major commercial real estate service companies, one of which was the parent company of Pro Clean. The arrangement was not public. It had been structured over several years with the deliberate patience of a man who understood that the most effective traps were the ones that looked like landscape. When Elizabeth Morgan had made her call to Pro Clean that morning, she had done so with no knowledge that the company she was calling was already, quietly, part of the architecture of her own undoing. She had simply been a woman in a hurry who had slipped on a floor and needed someone to be angry at. The fact that her anger had been directed at the one man Victor Hale had privately flagged as a potential complication was not coincidence. That was Hale. That was the kind of precision he operated with. Robert Williams had been flagged 18 months ago when Hale's people had first begun assembling the case against Elizabeth. A routine background check, the kind run on all building service personnel at Tier 1 properties, had surfaced something that should not have been surfaceable. A redacted file. A service record with entire sections blacked out. The kind of blacking out that, to anyone who knew how to read it, said more than any unredacted page could. Hale's security director, a former DIA analyst named Christopher Harris, had taken one look at the pattern of redactions and told Hale, This man is not what he appears to be. Get him away from the building before we move on the woman. And Hale had said, use the woman to do it. Let her make the call. Cleaner that way. No fingerprints on our side. So Elizabeth Morgan, in her fury over a wet floor, had been a tool without knowing it. And Robert Williams, in being reassigned, had been maneuvered without knowing it. Two people moved across a board by a third hand they couldn't see. Robert had understood this kind of play in the abstract. He had simply never expected to encounter it on this particular chessboard. When Kenneth finished, Robert stood on the library steps for 30 seconds without speaking. Tell me the part about the subcontract again. Kenneth walked through it a second time. The shell companies, the ownership structure, the timeline that placed Hale's acquisition of ProClean's parent company exactly 6 months before Elizabeth Morgan's rapid rise had begun to threaten his control over the board. You still there, brother? I'm here. What do you want to do? Robert looked through the library window, could see Daniel at the corner table, head bent over his worksheet, pencil moving carefully. I need to think. You need anything from me, you call. I know. Robert. Yeah. Watch yourself. This man plays long games. I know. He hung up, went back inside, sat down next to his son. Dad, Daniel said, not looking up from the worksheet, if you had to choose between a dog that could talk and a dog that was really, really fast, which one would you pick? Robert considered this with the gravity it deserved. Depends what the fast one was fast at. Daniel looked up. This was apparently not the response he had anticipated. He thought about it. Fast at running, he decided. Then I'd take the talking one. A dog that could run fast is just a dog. A dog that could talk might have something interesting to say. Daniel absorbed this. He appeared to find it satisfying, went back to the worksheet. Robert watched him for a moment. The bent head, the careful pencil, the small, concentrated furrow of his son's brow, and felt the thing he always felt in these moments, which had no clean name but sat in the chest like a warm and necessary weight. Whatever happened next, whatever Timothy Clark's call had started, whatever adjustments were required, whatever the next set of numbers looked like when he did the arithmetic again tonight, Daniel would be fine. Robert would make sure of it. That was not optimism. That was simply the commitment of a man who had already decided. 3 blocks away, in an apartment too quiet for the amount of money being paid for it, Elizabeth Morgan sat in a designer chair and looked at the harbor through floor-to-ceiling windows and tried to locate inside herself some instruction for what came next. She found none. The part of her that had always known what came next, that had built a $900 million company on the certainty of what came next, was silent. That silence was the most frightening thing she had ever experienced. It had been 3 days since the conference room. 3 days since Victor Hale had sat across from her with a document already prepared and a decision already made and 22 minutes of language designed to be simultaneously precise and deniable. The board had concerns. The Q3 projections were not projections they could defend to institutional investors. There were questions about the regulatory filing. There was a phrase, breach of fiduciary responsibility, that appeared twice in the document pushed across the table to her. A document that had clearly been prepared days ago, perhaps weeks, and that covered its surface area with the efficient thoroughness of something assembled by attorneys who had not been told to leave room for negotiation. Elizabeth Morgan had sat in that chair and had not flinched. She had not survived everything she had survived by flinching. But inside, where none of them could see, something had been cracking. Not breaking. Not yet. Cracking in the way of ice under pressure. The way a thing holds its shape in the moment before it no longer can. She had signed nothing. She had said very little. She had been walked out of the building at 9:15 in the morning with a box, a single box, the kind that holds a life in office form, a framed photo, a small plant, 2 books with her own notes in the margins, and she had stood on the sidewalk outside Morgan Tower for a moment that felt much longer than it was. In the mild autumn light, holding the box with both arms the way you hold something when you're not sure your hands will stay steady otherwise. She had not cried, not because she was made of stone. She knew now, more than ever, that she was not. but because there was no room for it yet. Grief was a room you entered when the adrenaline finished. And the adrenaline had not finished. She had driven to this apartment, sat in this chair, and felt the enormous silence of a life that had been built entirely outward. She had no one to call. This was the fact that sat heaviest. Not the board, not the filing, not the word breach. But the moment when she reached for her phone to call someone who would understand and realized that the people she had were professional contacts, not human ones. Her assistant, her CFO, her attorney, whom she was already composing a message to in her head. Her mother in Cleveland, who would listen and worry and say something kind that would somehow make Elizabeth feel worse. There was no one who simply knew her. There was no one who had been there long enough, been allowed close enough, had survived the particular climate of her life, and remained. She had done that. She understood that. The understanding did not make the room less quiet. She thought, for reasons she could not fully articulate, about the man in the lobby. The janitor, Robert Williams. She had thought about him twice in 3 days. Not because she felt remorse. She was not at that point capable of the emotional bandwidth that remorse required, but because something about the encounter had lodged in her at a depth she couldn't fully account for. The way he had said the sign was up. 2 words. No defensiveness. No appeal. Just a fact stated quietly by a man who was not particularly interested in whether she believed it or not. She had been managed, flattered, maneuvered, and argued with by some of the most powerful people in American business. She could not remember the last time someone had simply told her the truth and then moved on without waiting to see what she did with it. On the 5th day, at 7:15 in the morning, she went back to Morgan Tower. Not to reclaim anything. Not because her attorney had advised it. He had specifically advised against it, but because she could not locate herself anywhere else. The building, even occupied by the people who had taken it from her, was still the most real place she knew. She stood across the street, looked at the glass facade, the name above the entrance, her name, her father's name before it was hers. Felt something that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but contained elements of both, compressed into a single point behind her sternum, like coal that has been squeezed until it might become something harder. That was when she saw him. Robert Williams was coming out of the service entrance on the south side of the building, not in a pro-clean uniform this time, but in civilian clothes, dark jacket, carrying a manila envelope, moving with the unhurried purposefulness that was particular to him. He did not see her. He walked north, turned left at the corner, disappeared. Elizabeth stood on the sidewalk for another minute. Then she followed. He went into the public library on Halston Street. She waited on the steps for 20 minutes, feeling absurd. A woman in a $1,200 coat sitting on library steps with no particular reason to be there. Then went inside. He was at a corner table with a boy, 7 years old, perhaps 8. The boy had a worksheet in front of him and was working through it with the furrowed concentration of a child who takes things seriously. The man, Robert, was not doing anything in particular. He was simply there, one hand on the table, paper coffee cup in the other, watching his son with a quality of attention that Elizabeth recognized in some distant analytical part of herself as the rarest thing she had seen in years. He was not on his phone. He was not thinking about something else. He was not present in the performative way of people at parenting classes who have been told that presence is important. He was simply there, completely, the way a tree is in a field, not because it decided to be, but because that was what it was. She sat 3 tables away, told herself she was resting, watched him for 20 minutes, left before he saw her. That night, in the apartment that cost $4,400 a month and contained almost nothing of her actual life, Elizabeth Morgan sat with a glass of wine she did not drink and tried to understand what she had witnessed in that library. A father and a son. A worksheet. 20 minutes of complete, undivided attention. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make the news or move a stock price or appear in anyone's performance review. And yet it had been the most remarkable thing she had seen in longer than she could remember. She thought about the last time someone had looked at her the way that man had looked at his son, with attention that was not transactional, not strategic, not part of some larger agenda, just there. She could not remember. She set down the wine, picked up her phone, put it down again. There was no one to call. That fact had not changed in 5 days. It would not change tonight. But something else had changed. Some small thing she could not yet name. Some seed planted by the sight of a man and a boy at a library table. A man she had fired. A man who had every reason to hate her. A man who was, at this very moment, probably doing his own arithmetic about rent and groceries and what comes next when the steady paycheck disappears. And yet when she had watched him in that library, she had not seen anger, had not seen bitterness, had seen only a father present with his son. Completely. As if that was the only thing in the world that mattered, because perhaps, to him, it was. Elizabeth Morgan sat in her expensive apartment and understood, for the first time in a very long time, that she had been asking the wrong questions, had been optimizing for the wrong variables, had been building toward the wrong finish line. She did not yet know what the right questions were, but she knew with sudden and absolute clarity that the life she had been living was not one she could continue. The phone buzzed. Her attorney. She let it go to voicemail. Whatever he had to say could wait. Outside the window, the city moved through its evening. Lights coming on in 1,000 windows. People going home to apartments and houses and lives that were not defined entirely by work. Lives that had room for other things. For people. For moments that mattered not because they advanced a strategy, but because they were simply worth being present for. Elizabeth had spent 15 years believing that such moments were a luxury she could not afford, that success required sacrifice, that you could not build an empire and also have a life. She was beginning to suspect she had been wrong. The realization did not make the apartment less quiet, did not change the fact that she had no one to call, did not undo 15 years of choices that had brought her to this point. But it was something, a crack in the ice, a small shift in the foundation, the beginning, perhaps, of a different kind of understanding. 3 blocks away, Robert Williams sat at his kitchen table after Daniel was asleep. The apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes at 10 o'clock on a weeknight when the neighbors have settled and the traffic is thinned and the city itself seems to exhale. He had a notebook open in front of him, pen in hand, writing down what Kenneth had told him. Not on a computer, on paper. The way he had been taught to think through problems that required clarity and sequence. He wrote for 40 minutes. Then he sat back and read what he had written and understood, with the quiet certainty of a man who has done this kind of assessment in conditions where the stakes were measured in lives, that the situation was not only navigable, but winnable. Winning it would require, above all else, patience. Patience and the willingness to be, for just a little while longer, the man no one saw coming. Robert closed the notebook, put it in the drawer beneath the 31 drawings, went to check on Daniel one more time before bed. The boy was asleep, breathing easy, one arm around the stuffed dog, face peaceful in the way that only a child's face can be peaceful, trusting that the world is safe because the people who love you have made it so. Robert stood in the doorway and made a promise, not out loud, just between himself and whatever part of the universe was listening. Whatever came next, Daniel would be protected. Whatever game Victor Hale was playing, whatever board he thought he was moving pieces across, he had made one critical miscalculation. He had assumed that invisibility meant powerlessness, had assumed that a man mopping floors was a man without options, without skills, without the capacity to fight back. Victor Hale had been wrong before. He was wrong now, and by the time he understood his mistake, it would be too late to correct it. Robert turned off the light, closed the door most of the way, left it open just enough that he would hear if Daniel called. Then he went to his own room, set his alarm for 4 a.m., lay down in the darkness and thought about nothing in particular until sleep came. Tomorrow he would start, not with rage, not with revenge, but with the methodical, patient application of skills he had spent years acquiring in places that had taught him the most important lesson of all. That power was not about position. Power was about knowing exactly who you were and what you were capable of when everything else was stripped away. And Robert Williams knew exactly who he was. The cafe on the corner of Halston and Vere was the kind of place that existed in every American city. Small tables, mismatched chairs, Coffee that was good enough to justify the price but not good enough to inspire loyalty. The perfect venue for a conversation that needed to look unremarkable. Robert arrived 15 minutes early, ordered black coffee, took a table in the back corner where he could see both entrances and keep his back to the wall. Old habits, the kind that never really left. Patricia Miller walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. She was smaller than he'd expected from Kenneth's description. Mid-50s, precise posture, the careful eyes of a person who had spent years observing powerful people and drawing private conclusions. She ordered tea, sat down across from him without preamble. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone who looked more like he needed something." "I need information." "That's not the same as needing something." She thought about that for a moment, stirred her tea though she'd added nothing to it. "Kenneth said you were Navy." "I was." "And now you clean buildings." "I do." She studied him with an expression he recognized. Assessment. Trying to reconcile the man in front of her with whatever story Kenneth had told. Whatever redacted file Christopher Harris had flagged 18 months ago. Victor Hale is a careful man. Methodical. He doesn't make mistakes. But he has a weakness. Which is? He believes his own story, believes he's smarter than everyone in the room, believes the systems he's built are perfect because he built them. She paused. That kind of certainty makes you blind to your own vulnerabilities. Robert waited. Let the silence do its work. "I worked for him 6 years, executive assistant. You know what that means in practice? It means you see everything. The emails he doesn't send himself, the calls he takes in his office with the door closed, the documents he needs prepared before anyone else knows there's a decision being made." "What happened?" "He restructured." That's the word they used, restructuring. But what it actually meant was that I'd been there long enough to connect patterns, to understand how the shell companies worked, how the offshore accounts moved, how the same law firm kept appearing on opposite sides of deals that should have been competitive but somehow always resolved in Hale's favor. She lifted her tea, set it back down without drinking. "I made the mistake of asking a question, just one, about a filing that didn't match the internal documents I'd prepared." He smiled at me, thanked me for my diligence. Then I was gone within a week. "You kept copies?" It wasn't a question. "Insurance I never got to use. Until now." She reached into her bag, pulled out a USB drive, set it on the table between them. "Everything I kept. The original regulatory filing for Morgan Financial, the version that was actually submitted. Side by side they tell a story about who changed what and when." Robert picked up the drive, turned it over in his fingers. "There's more," Patricia continued. "The journalist who ran the leak about Elizabeth Morgan's Q3 numbers. His name is Stephen Taylor, works for Financial Observer, good reporter, ethical as far as these things go, but he got played. The source he thought was a whistleblower inside Morgan Financial was actually a PR consultant on Hale's payroll." "You have proof?" "Email trail. The consultant's name is David Martinez. He's worked for Hale on 4 separate takedowns in the last 6 years. Always the same pattern. Anonymous tip to a journalist. Supporting documents that look legitimate. Story runs. Target's credibility collapses. Hale moves in with a solution that benefits him." Robert slipped the USB drive into his jacket pocket. "What does Hale want with Morgan Financial?" "Control. Elizabeth built that company from nothing, made it valuable, but she also made it independent. The board respects her. Institutional investors trust her. As long as she's CEO, Hale's just a shareholder. A large shareholder, yes, but not the architect, not the decision maker. And now? He has a board presentation scheduled 11 days from now. He'll propose a restructuring, new leadership, a management team he's already selected, people who will be grateful to him for the opportunity, people who will remember who gave it to them." Patricia finished her tea. This time she actually drank it. 11 days, Robert repeated. "That's your window. After that presentation, Elizabeth Morgan won't just be out. She'll be erased. The company will still have her father's name on the building, but it will be Hale's company in every way that matters." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them the cafe moved through its afternoon rhythms. Students with laptops, A young mother with a stroller. Two men in suits discussing a contract, none of them aware of the conversation happening 3 tables away. "Why are you doing this?" Robert's voice was quiet. "You could have sat on this information, stayed invisible. Hale doesn't know you kept copies. I worked for that man for 6 years, watched him dismantle people's lives like he was solving a puzzle. Efficient, methodical, completely detached from the human cost." She met his eyes. "I didn't speak up then because I was afraid. I'm still afraid. But I'm also tired of being the person who knows the truth and does nothing with it." Robert stood, extended his hand. She shook it with a grip that was firmer than he'd expected. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Hale has resources you can't imagine. He has lawyers and investigators and people whose entire job is to make problems disappear. You're going up against someone who's been playing this game for 30 years. "I know. Do you?" She studied him one more time. "Kenneth said you were the real thing. Said you were the kind of man who walked into rooms other men wouldn't survive and walked back out like it was another Tuesday. I hope he's right." Robert left the cafe and walked 3 blocks to where his car was parked, a 15-year-old Civic with 170,000 miles on it. He sat behind the wheel for 5 minutes before starting the engine, thinking through what Patricia had told him, the timeline, the players, the pressure points. 11 days. He started the car, drove to Daniel's school, parked in the pickup line with the other parents, and waited. Watched the doors until they opened and the children came streaming out. Daniel appeared in the 3rd wave, backpack riding high on his shoulders, head turning left and right because the world was still interesting to him and he hadn't yet learned to stop looking. Robert waved. Daniel saw him, broke into a run, climbed into the passenger seat with the kind of enthusiasm that couldn't be faked. "Dad, we learned about the water cycle today. Did you know that the same water molecules have been around since basically forever? Like the water I drank today could have been drunk by dinosaurs." "I did not know that." "It's called the hydrological cycle. That's the science word for it." They drove home with Daniel narrating everything he'd learned about evaporation and condensation and precipitation. Robert listened with his full attention, asked questions at the right moments, let his son's voice fill the car. When they got to the apartment, Daniel went straight to the table with his homework. Robert made him a snack. Apple slices with peanut butter, glass of milk. Then he stepped into the bedroom and called Kenneth. "I met with Patricia." "And?" "She gave me everything. The original filing, the falsified version, the connection to the journalist." "You trust it?" "I trust her." Kenneth was quiet for a moment. Robert could hear something in the background. Traffic. The sound of a city that never quite went silent. "What's your next move?" "I need to talk to the journalist. Stephen Taylor. He got used. I'm betting he doesn't like being used. You want me to set it up?" "No. This one I do myself. Cold. If it comes through you, it looks like a setup. If I walk in alone, it's just a man with information." "Your call, brother." "Kenneth." "Yeah." "The timeline's tight. 11 days until Hale's board presentation." "That's not a lot of runway." "It's enough." He hung up, walked back to the living room. Daniel was bent over his math worksheet, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, a habit he'd had since he was 3. Robert sat down across from him, watched his son work through the problems, addition and subtraction, simple stuff. But Daniel approached it with the same seriousness he brought to everything. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Robert stepped back into the bedroom. "Mr. Williams?" A woman's voice. Professional. Careful. "Speaking." "This is Elizabeth Morgan." Robert said nothing. Let the silence extend. "I know what you're doing." Her voice was steady, no tremor, no uncertainty. "I'd like to help." "How did you get this number?" "I called ProClean. Told them I needed to reach you about a personal matter. They gave me your contact information." "That's not how it works." "It is when you're the CEO of a company that pays them $300,000 a year. You're not the CEO anymore. They don't know that yet. The announcement won't be public for another week." Robert walked to the window, looked down at the street. A bus pulling away from the stop. 2 kids on skateboards. An old man walking a small dog. "Why are you calling?" "Because I saw you. At the library. With your son." She paused. "I followed you there. I know how that sounds. But I needed to understand who you were. Beyond the lobby. Beyond the floor." "And what did you understand?" "That I made a mistake. That I looked at you and didn't see you. That I was the kind of person I don't want to be." Robert waited. "I've spent the last 5 days trying to figure out what happened to me. How I went from CEO to escorted out of my own building in the space of 22 minutes. I hired investigators, called in favors, started pulling threads. And I'm not stupid, Mr. Williams. I know when I'm being outplayed. Victor Hale orchestrated my removal with precision I have to respect even as it destroys me. But there's one thing I can't figure out." "Which is?" "Why did he have you reassigned? You're a janitor, no offense. But in the grand scheme of taking down a CEO, why does the man mopping the floor matter?" "You'd have to ask him. I'm asking you." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the old man with the dog had stopped to let the animal sniff a fire hydrant. Simple moment, unremarkable, the kind of thing that happened 1,000 times a day in 1,000 different cities. "Where are you?" "Home, my apartment." "Stay there. I'll come to you." "When?" 2 hours. He hung up before she could respond. Daniel had finished his homework, was now drawing something that appeared to involve a spaceship and the same dog that appeared in most of his pictures. Robert sat down next to him. "Hey, buddy. I need to go out for a little while tonight. Mrs. Ortega is going to come stay with you." "Where are you going?" "I have to meet someone. Talk about some things." "Work things?" "Sort of." Daniel absorbed this, went back to his drawing. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Are we okay?" The question landed in Robert's chest like a stone dropping into still water. He reached out, put his hand on his son's shoulder. "We're fine, Daniel, I promise. You always keep your promises. Always." Margaret Ortega arrived at 6. She brought a bag of cookies and a willingness to be told nothing about where Robert was going or why. He'd learned not to offer explanations. She'd learned not to ask for them. It was a system that worked. He drove to Elizabeth's address, a building in the financial district, glass and steel, doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than Robert's monthly rent, the kind of place where even the lobby furniture had a pedigree. The doorman looked at him, looked at his jacket, looked at his car still running at the curb. "Can I help you?" "Elizabeth Morgan. She's expecting me." The doorman picked up the phone, spoke quietly, hung up. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Recognition that, however Robert looked, he had clearance. 12th floor, 12C. The elevator was the kind with a mirror on the back wall. Robert looked at his reflection, saw what the doorman had seen. A man in jeans and a dark jacket. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that suggested he belonged in a building where apartments started at 7 figures. Exactly the way he wanted it. The elevator opened directly into her apartment. No hallway, just the doors sliding back to reveal a space that was all windows and expensive emptiness. Elizabeth stood in the center of the room, still dressed for an office she no longer went to. Slacks and a blouse, hair pulled back, face composed but tired in a way that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Mr. Williams? Robert? Would you like something to drink?" "No." She gestured to the couch. He didn't sit, stayed standing, hands loose at his sides, weight balanced, old habits. "You said you know what I'm doing." "I know you're not just a janitor. Kenneth Scott has a very specific reputation in certain circles, the kind of circles I've brushed against in 15 years of building a company. Private security, corporate intelligence, the sort of work that doesn't advertise but gets whispered about when people need problems solved quietly. Kenneth's a friend. Friends like Kenneth Scott don't call unless the situation requires his particular skill set, which means you're not looking for a new job. You're looking into Victor Hale." Robert moved to the window. The view was remarkable. The entire harbor spread out below, lights starting to come on as evening settled. He could see Morgan Tower from here. the name still illuminated above the entrance. "Tell me about the filing." Elizabeth blinked, recalibrated. "The regulatory filing? The one Hale used to remove you. How do you know about that?" Robert turned to face her. "I know a lot of things. What I don't know is your version. The board said there were irregularities, questions about compliance, but I'm guessing that's not the whole story." Elizabeth sat down, not on the couch but on the arm of it, like someone who couldn't quite commit to settling. "The filing was clean when I submitted it. I checked it myself, 3 times. I'm careful about these things, pathologically careful. It's how I built a company from nothing without getting crushed by the people who thought a 25-year-old woman from Cleveland had no business in their world. But the version the regulators received wasn't the same. No, someone altered it. Changed dates, modified figures, small things. The kind of things that would look like mistakes. Like I'd been sloppy. Or worse, like I'd been trying to hide something." "You have the original?" "Of course." "Can you prove it was the original?" She hesitated. "It's complicated. Digital files have metadata, timestamps. But metadata can be manipulated if you know what you're doing, and whoever did this knew what they were doing." Robert pulled the USB drive from his pocket, held it up. "What if I told you I have both versions, the real original and the falsified submission, with a chain of custody that shows exactly when the changes were made and by whom?" Elizabeth stood, crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. "Where did you get that?" "Someone who worked for Hale. Someone who kept insurance." "Patricia Miller." It wasn't a question. Robert didn't confirm it. Elizabeth's hand came up, stopped just short of reaching for the drive. "Why are you helping me? You don't owe me anything. I had you fired. Reassigned. Don't split hairs. I made a call that cost you a job you needed." "Yes. So why?" Robert looked at her. Really looked. Saw past the expensive apartment and the CEO title and the armor of professional competence. Saw the woman underneath, exhausted, frightened, alone in the center of a life she'd built entirely for herself and now couldn't recognize. Because what was done to you was wrong. Not because of who you are or what you built, because it was wrong, and I was in a position to do something about it. A position? She almost laughed. "You mop floors. I used to do other things." "Kenneth said you were Navy." "I was." "What did you do?" "Things I'd rather not discuss in a living room." They stood 3 feet apart, the city glittering below them, the harbor dark beyond the lights. 2 people who should never have been in the same room, brought together by the careful machinations of a man who thought he understood all the variables. "I need to know something." Elizabeth's voice was quieter now. "In 5 days, Victor Hale will stand in front of my board. If nothing changes, he's going to finish what he started. I need to know if you're the kind of person who fights back, or if you're the kind who just helps from the shadows and then disappears." Robert was silent for a long moment. "My son is 7 years old. He draws me pictures every night before I go to work, 32 of them now in my kitchen drawer. He wants a dog. He trusts that someday we'll have a yard and I'll keep that promise." He paused. "Everything I do thinking about him, about the world I'm building for him to grow up in, about the kind of man I want him to see when he looks at his father." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is. I fight back, but I do it for the right reasons, and I do it the right way, through the system, through evidence and exposure and the legal mechanisms that exist precisely for situations like this, not for revenge, for justice. There's a difference." Elizabeth searched his face, looking for something, certainty maybe, or proof that he meant what he said. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to trust me, be patient, and when the time comes, I need you to stand in front of that board and fight." "I can do that." "There's one more thing. Hale can't know we're working together. You go back to being defeated. Quiet. Out of sight. You let him think he won. And you? I stay invisible. It's what I'm good at." She nodded slowly, processing, accepting. "There's something you should know about Hale. He doesn't just destroy people professionally, he destroys them completely. reputation, relationships, future opportunities. He's methodical about it. By the time he's done, there's nothing left to come back to. I know. Do you? Because if you're wrong about this, if your evidence isn't airtight or your timing is off or any one of a dozen things goes wrong, he won't just come after you. He'll come after everything you care about. Robert thought about Daniel, about the drawings in the kitchen drawer, about Margaret Ortega, who asked for nothing and gave everything, about the promises he'd made to a 7-year-old boy who trusted that his father would keep them. I know, he repeated. That's why I won't be wrong. He left the apartment without another word, rode the elevator down, walked past the doorman who watched him go with the same neutral expression, got in his car and drove home through evening traffic that was starting to thin. Margaret was reading to Daniel when he got back. They were on the couch together, Daniel curled against her side. Margaret's voice steady and warm as she worked through a chapter about a boy and his dog and an adventure that involved a river. Robert stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. This was what mattered. This quiet tableau of a child safe and content and surrounded by people who cared about him. This was the foundation. Everything else was architecture built on top of it. Margaret saw him, finished the paragraph, closed the book. I should go. School night. Thank you. No need. She stood, touched Daniel's head gently. He's a good boy. I know. When she was gone, Robert sat down next to his son. Good chapter? Yeah. They're about to find the lost puppy. I think it's hiding in the cave by the river. Probably a good guess. Dad? Yeah, buddy. When we get our dog, can we name him something cool? Not just like Spot or Buddy. Something with a story. Like what? I don't know yet. I'll know when I meet him. Robert pulled his son close, felt the small weight of him, the trust, the certainty that everything would be okay because Dad said it would be okay. That's a good plan. You always say my plans are good. That's because they usually are. Daniel yawned. Robert felt it more than heard it. The shift in his son's breathing, the way his body started to settle toward sleep even though bedtime was still an hour away. Come on. Bath and then you can read in bed for a little while. Can I bring the dinosaur book? You can bring whatever you want. Later, after Daniel was asleep and the apartment had settled into its nighttime quiet, Robert sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He'd spent 40 minutes researching Stephen Taylor, Financial Observer's senior investigative reporter, 20 years in the business, Pulitzer nomination for a series on offshore tax shelters, the kind of journalist who took his work seriously, who built sources carefully, who checked facts compulsively because his reputation depended on being right. Exactly the kind of journalist who would be furious to discover he'd been played. Robert composed an email. Short, direct, no flourishes. Mr. Taylor, my name is Robert Williams. I have information about one of your recent stories, specifically about the source you relied on for your piece on Morgan Financial's Q3 irregularities. I believe you were misled. I have documentation that proves it. If you're interested in hearing the truth, meet me tomorrow at noon. Halston Library, 3rd floor reading room, come alone. He read it 3 times, deleted 2 words, added 1, hit send. Then he opened a new document and began writing down everything he knew. The timeline, the players, the connections, the way Hale's shell companies moved money through 3 layers of corporate structure before landing in the accounts that mattered. The pattern of acquisitions that had placed him in position to control Elizabeth's removal without ever appearing to be the one pulling the strings. He wrote for 2 hours. When he finished, he had a map, not complete, but clear enough to see the shape of what Hale had built, and more importantly, where the weak points were. Every system had weak points. Every fortress had a gate. Every man who believed himself untouchable had blind spots created by that very belief. Hale's blind spot was his certainty, his conviction that he'd thought of everything, that the pieces were in place and the outcome was inevitable. He hadn't thought of Robert Williams, hadn't thought that the janitor he'd maneuvered off the board might be capable of maneuvering back, hadn't thought that invisibility could be a weapon instead of a weakness. By the time Hale understood his mistake, it would be too late. Robert closed the laptop, checked on Daniel one more time. The boy was deeply asleep now, breathing easy, face peaceful, one arm flung out to the side in the careless way of children who've never had reason to sleep defensively. Robert stood in the doorway and made another promise, silent, just between himself and the dark. Whatever it took, however careful he had to be, however patient he had to remain, Daniel would be protected. The life they'd built together would be protected. And the men who thought they could crush people like pawns on a board would learn that some pawns were only pawns because no one had bothered to look closer. The next morning, Robert drove Daniel to school, watched him disappear into the building with his oversized backpack and his enthusiasm for everything. Then he drove to the library on Halston Street. Stephen Taylor was already there, sitting at a table in the third-floor reading room, mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, the slightly rumpled appearance of a man who spent more time thinking about his work than his wardrobe. Robert sat down across from him. Taylor looked up from his phone. "Robert Williams?" "Yes." "You said you have information about my Morgan financial piece." "I do." "Are you a source inside the company?" "No." "Then how do you know anything about my sourcing?" Robert pulled out his phone, called up a photo he'd taken of one of the documents from Patricia's USB drive, turned the screen so Taylor could see it. Taylor leaned forward. His expression shifted, from skepticism to focus, from focus to something harder, colder. "Where did you get this?" Someone who kept records, someone who knew exactly what Victor Hale was doing and decided it was time to stop watching. "Victor Hale." Taylor said the name like he was tasting something bitter. "The source who contacted me about Morgan Financial swore he was internal, a whistleblower concerned about regulatory compliance. His name is David Martinez. He's a PR consultant. He's worked for Hale on 4 separate takedowns in the last 6 years. Always the same pattern. Anonymous tip, supporting documents, story runs, target collapses, Hale benefits." Taylor's jaw tightened. Robert could see the wheels turning, the journalist's mind working backward through the story, questioning every assumption, every detail he'd taken on faith because the source seemed credible and the documents seemed legitimate. "You're telling me I was used. I'm telling you that you were targeted, specifically, because you're good at what you do, because people trust your byline, because when Stephen Taylor says something is wrong, people believe it." Taylor sat back, pulled off his glasses, rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. "Son of a bitch. You have a chance to fix it." "How?" "Run the real story. The complete story. How Hale orchestrated Elizabeth Morgan's removal. How he falsified the regulatory filing. How he used you to do his dirty work because he knew your reputation would sell it. I need more than what's on your phone. I have more. Everything. Emails, document trails, the chain of custody that shows exactly when and how the filing was altered, financial records connecting Martinez to Hale, all of it." Taylor put his glasses back on, leaned forward again. "Why are you doing this? Does it matter?" "It does if I'm going to stake my credibility on your evidence. I need to know who you are and what your angle is." Robert was quiet for a moment. Around them, the library went about its business. Students studying, a woman reading to her daughter, 2 elderly men playing chess by the window, life continuing in its small, ordinary ways, while in a third-floor reading room, 2 men negotiated the dismantling of a powerful man's carefully constructed empire. "I don't have an angle. I have a son. He's 7 years old. He trusts me to do the right thing, to be the kind of man worth trusting. That's my angle." Taylor studied him. Journalist's assessment, looking for the lie, the inconsistency, the hidden agenda. "You were military. A long time ago. And now you're what? Freelance justice? Now I'm a father who's trying to make sure the world his son grows up in has some accountability in it. Some consequence for men who think power means they can do whatever they want to, whoever they want." Taylor nodded slowly. "Give me what you have. All of it. I'll need 2 days to verify. Run it past my editors. Make sure every piece is airtight." "You have 4 days. Hale's board presentation is in 11 days. The story needs to run at least 3 days before that. Give the board time to read it, time to ask questions, time to understand what they're really voting on. That's a tight timeline." It's the timeline we have. Robert stood, pulled the USB drive from his pocket, set it on the table between them. Everything you need is on there, but you can't keep it. Read it, verify it, copy what you need, but the original stays with me. Why? Because if something happens to me, I need insurance. And because I don't know you well enough yet to trust that you won't decide this story is too dangerous to run. Taylor picked up the drive, turned it over in his fingers. I've been doing this 20 years. I've never killed a story because it was dangerous, only because it wasn't true. Then we won't have a problem. Robert left the library and drove to the address Kenneth had sent him that morning, an office building in a part of town that was halfway between gentrified and abandoned. Kenneth was waiting in the lobby. They went up to the third floor without speaking, entered an empty office suite that still had furniture but no people. This is clean? Swept it myself this morning. No cameras, no bugs. We have 2 hours before the next tenant shows up. They sat at a conference table scarred by years of use. Kenneth had a laptop open, 3 files displayed on the screen. I pulled everything I could find on Christopher Harris, Hale's security director, former DIA. Left the agency under circumstances that are officially classified but unofficially suggest he didn't leave voluntarily. What did he do? Best I can tell, got too comfortable bending rules, started taking liberties with intelligence protocols. Nothing prosecutable, nothing that would make the news, just enough to make him a liability. So Hale hired him. Exactly. Harris has skills, connections, and just enough ethical flexibility to be useful. But here's the interesting part. Kenneth clicked to a new screen. Financial records, bank transfers, offshore accounts. Harris doesn't just work for Hale, he's invested with him. Shell company partnerships, shared accounts in jurisdictions where transparency is optional. They're not just employer and employee, they're partners. Which means Harris knows everything. Everything. And if Harris can be convinced to flip, we don't just have evidence, we have a witness. Someone who can testify to the mechanics of how Hale operates, the conversations that happened behind closed doors, the decisions that were made verbally and never documented. Robert looked at the screen, at the numbers that represented years of careful coordination between 2 men who thought they were untouchable. What's Harris's weakness? Self-preservation. He's former intelligence. He knows how the game works. Right now he's protected because Hale's protected. But if Hale goes down and Harris is still tied to him, he goes down too. Conspiracy. Wire fraud. RICO if the prosecutors want to get creative. But if he cooperates early and completely, he could walk away with immunity, maybe even keep some of the money if his lawyers are good enough. You think he'll take that deal? Kenneth leaned back in his chair. I think Christopher Harris is a survivor, and survivors know when to jump ship. They talked for another hour, working through scenarios, testing assumptions, building backup plans for the backup plans. By the time Robert left, he had a strategy that was risky but viable, ambitious but achievable. He drove home, made dinner for Daniel, helped with homework, read 3 chapters of The River Adventure, tucked his son into bed with the stuffed dog and the growing certainty that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was safe. After Daniel was asleep, Robert's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. The package you sent me. We should talk, tonight if possible. He called the number. Stephen Taylor answered on the second ring. I've been through about half of it. The email trail between Martinez and Hale is devastating. The document comparison on the regulatory filing is airtight, but there's something else here I didn't expect. What? The shell company structure. It's not just about Morgan Financial. Hale's used this same playbook at least 7 times in the last 8 years. Different targets, different industries, but the pattern is identical. Acquire leverage, create crisis, swoop in with solution, walk away with control. You can prove that? With what's on this drive? Absolutely. This isn't just a story about Elizabeth Morgan getting pushed out. This is a story about systematic corporate manipulation, about a man who's built an empire by destroying other people's companies and then buying the pieces for pennies on the dollar. Robert was quiet, processing, recalculating. How long to write it? If I work through the weekend, 3 days, maybe 4. But Robert, listen, a story this big, with this many moving parts, my editors are going to want to sit on it. Let their lawyers review. Make sure we're bulletproof before we publish. How long does that take? Week, maybe 2. We don't have 2 weeks. We have days. Single digits. Taylor sighed. Robert could hear him moving. The sound of a chair creaking, papers shuffling. I'll talk to them. Make the case for urgency. But I can't promise anything. Then I'll need a backup plan. Like what? Like going directly to the SEC or the board or anyone else who has authority to act. That's risky. Without the story to frame it, without the public pressure, Hale's lawyers will bury it in motions and delays. By the time it sees daylight, the board vote will be over and Elizabeth will be ancient history. I know. They hung up. Robert sat in his kitchen with the lights off and the city quiet beyond his windows, thinking about risk, about timing, about the difference between a plan that was careful and a plan that was simply too slow. 9 days left. The margin for error was shrinking, but the pieces were moving. Stephen Taylor digging into the evidence, Elizabeth waiting for her moment to fight back, Patricia Miller's insurance policy about to pay off in ways Hale never anticipated, and somewhere across the city, Victor Hale sitting in an office or a penthouse or wherever men like him sat when they believed they'd won, unaware that the board he'd been playing on had just added a piece he'd never accounted for, a piece that didn't look like much. A janitor, a single father, a man who mopped floors and went home and made pancakes and tucked his son into bed with promises about someday. But some pieces were only invisible until the moment they moved, and Robert Williams was about to move. The package arrived on the 9th day. Plain manila envelope, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Daniel walking to school, taken from across the street, far enough away to be legal, close enough to make the message clear. Robert stood in his kitchen holding the photograph for 3 full minutes, not moving, not breathing harder, just standing, the way he'd been trained to stand when everything inside wanted to move, but movement would give away position. He set the photo down, face up, so he could look at it while he thought. Someone had followed his son, photographed him, sent it to Robert's home address, which meant they knew where he lived, where Daniel went to school, the route they took every morning. Robert picked up his phone, dialed Kenneth. He knows. Hale? Someone knows. I just got a package. Photo of Daniel. No note, no threat. Just the picture. Kenneth was silent for a moment. You want to pull back? Robert looked at the photograph again. His 7-year-old son, backpack too big for his shoulders, head turned to look at something off camera. Probably a dog. Daniel always noticed dogs. No, we go faster. How fast? I'm calling Hale. Today. Direct. That's exposing yourself. He already knows who I am. The photo proves it. Might as well stop pretending. Your call, brother, but be careful. Men like Hale don't make moves they can't defend. If he sent that photo, he's got something else planned. Robert hung up. Looked up Victor Hale's office number. A direct line listed on Morgan Financial's corporate directory, the kind of number that probably went through 3 assistants before reaching the man himself. He dialed. It rang twice. Victor Hale's office. A woman's voice, professional, trained to screen. Tell him Robert Williams is calling. He'll want to take it. I'm sorry Mr. Hale is in meetings all day. If you'd like to leave a message, tell him it's about a photograph. He'll understand. Silence. Then, please hold. 60 seconds of generic hold music. Then the line clicked. Mr. Williams. Hale's voice was exactly what Robert expected. Smooth, controlled, the vocal equivalent of an expensive suit. I was wondering when you'd call. You photographed my son. I did no such thing. But I understand why you might think I did. Men in my position accumulate concerns, security concerns, and sometimes those concerns require vigilance about who might pose a risk to ongoing business interests. He's 7 years old. I'm aware. Bright child, I'm told. Excellent student. Particular fondness for dinosaurs and hypothetical dogs. Hale paused. You should be proud. Robert's hand tightened on the phone. Old training kicked in, breathing steady, voice calm, give nothing away. "What do you want?" "Want? I don't want anything from you, Mr. Williams. I'm simply concerned about the choices you seem to be making. Choices that might have consequences for people you care about." "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation. You're a smart man, capable man. I read your file. The unredacted parts, at least. What I could read was impressive. But here's what I've learned in 30 years of building businesses. Smart, capable men sometimes make the mistake of thinking their capabilities transfer. That being good at one thing makes them good at everything. Get to the point. The point is that you're out of your depth. You think you're playing chess, moving pieces, building towards some grand victory. But you're not playing chess. You're playing a game I've been winning since before you were born. Against people with more resources, more experience, more understanding of how these things actually work. "You done?" Hale laughed, genuine amusement. "I like you, I do. You've got spine. But spine doesn't protect your son when he's walking to school. It doesn't pay the rent when you can't find work, because every building in this city knows not to hire you. It doesn't erase the fact that I own the board you're trying to play on." Robert moved to the window, looked down at the street. A city bus, 2 women with coffee, a maintenance truck double parked. "Let me tell you what I understand. I understand men like you. I've dealt with men like you in places you wouldn't survive a day. You think power is money and connections, but real power is knowing exactly who you are when everything else is stripped away." Silence on the other end. Robert continued. "I know who I am, Mr. Hale. Question is, do you?" Another pause. When Hale spoke again, his voice had changed, still smooth, still controlled, but with an edge underneath. "You're making a mistake." "No. You made the mistake 18 months ago when you decided to use me as a piece on your board because you forgot to ask what kind of piece I actually was." Robert hung up, set the phone on the counter, stood very still for another minute. Then he called Margaret Ortega. "Margaret, I need a favor, a big one." "Name it." "Daniel needs to stay home from school for a few days. I'll tell them he's sick. But I need someone with him during the day, someone I trust, someone who won't ask questions about why I'm being this careful." "You think he's in danger?" "I think I need to be sure he's not. Bring him over. He can stay here as long as you need." Robert exhaled. "Thank you." "Robert, whatever you're doing, be careful." "I will." He made breakfast. Pancakes because it was ritual, and ritual was what held things together when everything else was uncertain. Daniel sat at the counter and narrated a theory about whether Spinosaurus could have beaten T-Rex in a fight. Robert listened and flipped pancakes and felt the weight of the photograph sitting on the counter 3 feet away. After breakfast, he drove Daniel to Margaret's apartment instead of school. "Am I sick?" "Not yet, but I think you might be getting something. Better to rest today." "But I feel fine." "I know, but sometimes we rest before we get sick so we don't get sick. Prevention." Daniel accepted this with the logic of a 7-year-old who trusted his father's judgment about mysterious adult things like prevention. Margaret met them at the door. "I was thinking we could bake cookies today, the kind with chocolate chips." Daniel's eyes lit up. Robert felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly. "I'll pick him up tonight." "Take your time." He drove to the Financial Observer offices, downtown, a building that had been renovated in the 90s and not touched since. Stephen Taylor met him in the lobby. "We need to talk, not here." They walked 3 blocks to a park, found a bench away from the foot traffic. Taylor had a folder. Robert could see papers inside, marked with highlighter, sticky notes flagging sections. "I finished going through everything. The evidence is solid, better than solid. It's devastating. But we have a problem." "Which is?" "My editor wants to sit on it, says it's too big to rush, says we need another week to verify, to run it past legal, to make absolutely sure we can defend every word of it. We don't have a week." "I know, I told him that. He doesn't care. He says journalism isn't about deadlines, it's about getting it right." Robert looked across the park, a woman throwing a tennis ball for a golden retriever, the dog ecstatic with the simplicity of the game. Fetch, return, repeat. What if you didn't need your editor's permission? What do you mean? What if you published it yourself? Blog, independent platform, whatever journalists use these days when they need to get something out without institutional approval. Taylor frowned. That would be career suicide. The Observer would fire me. Other papers wouldn't touch me. I'd be done. Or you'd be the journalist who broke the biggest corporate fraud story of the year, the one who didn't wait for permission to tell the truth. You're asking me to bet my career on this. I'm asking you to decide what matters more, your career or the story. Taylor was quiet for a long moment, watching the woman and the dog, the simple joy of it, the uncomplicated transaction of throw and catch and return. There's something else you should know. I got a call this morning from a lawyer, representing interests that weren't specified, suggesting that certain stories about certain prominent businessmen might expose me to litigation, defamation, tortious interference, the whole menu of legal threats designed to make me back down. Hale? Almost certainly. Which means he knows I'm working on this. Which means someone talked, or someone's watching, or both. Robert thought about the photograph, about Hale's voice on the phone, about the way powerful men always assumed they could see all the pieces on the board. Publish it anyway. Just like that? Just like that. Today. This afternoon if you can. Put it out there where it can't be pulled back, where it can't be buried by lawyers or editors or anyone else who decides the truth is too inconvenient. Taylor opened the folder, looked at the pages inside, years of investigative work, documentation, proof, the kind of story that defined careers. If I do this, I need to be absolutely sure, because there's no taking it back. You are sure. You verified everything. You know it's true. The only question is whether you're willing to stand behind it. Taylor closed the folder. My father was a journalist, small-town paper. He used to say that the job wasn't to make people comfortable. It was to tell them what they needed to know even when they didn't want to hear it. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Got fired 3 times for stories that made the wrong people angry. Died broke and proud. Taylor looked at Robert. Guess it runs in the family. They shook hands. Robert walked back to his car. Drove to an address Kenneth had sent him that morning. An office building. Neutral territory. 3rd floor conference room that was technically rented to a law firm that didn't exist. Christopher Harris was already there, sitting at the head of the table like he owned it. Mid-40s, trim, the careful posture of someone who'd spent years in classified briefings and hadn't forgotten how to sit when trust was conditional. Robert took the chair opposite him. Kenneth stood by the door, present but not participating. Mr. Williams, I've been curious about you. Have you? When I flagged your file 18 months ago, I told Hale you were a problem. He didn't listen. Said you were just a janitor. Said janitors don't have the resources or the intelligence to be real threats. You disagreed. I spent 10 years at DIA. I know what redacted files look like. More importantly, I know what they mean. The kind of operations that get redacted aren't the kind that produce men who mop floors without reason. What's your point? My point is that I respect you, professional to professional. You're good at what you do, but you're also about to make a serious mistake. Robert waited. You think you can take down Victor Hale. You think you have evidence and allies and momentum. You might even be right. But here's what you don't have. Protection. The kind that keeps you breathing when powerful men decide you're a liability. Is that a threat? It's advice. From someone who's been in rooms where these decisions get made, where people who ask the wrong questions or know the wrong things stop being problems. Robert leaned back in his chair. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm a survivor, and survivors know when to recognize other survivors. You could walk away from this. Take your son. Move to another city. Start over somewhere Hale's influence doesn't reach. Live a quiet life. Raise your kid. Stay invisible. Or you keep pushing, and you win, and Hale goes down, and everyone connected to him goes down too, including me. Unless, Harris smiled, thin, professional, unless I give you what you need before you need to come looking for it. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folder, set it on the table between them. Offshore accounts, shell company partnerships, every transaction I helped structure over the last 6 years. Complete documentation of how Hale operates, not just with Morgan Financial, with 7 other companies. A pattern of systematic manipulation, fraud, market manipulation, wire transfers across state lines, which makes it federal. Robert opened the folder, scanned the first few pages, bank records, corporate filings, email chains. Why? Because right now I'm Victor Hale's security director. If he goes down, I go down with him. But if I cooperate early and completely, if I become the government's star witness, I walk away. Immunity. Witness protection if it comes to that. Maybe even keep some of the money if my lawyers are good enough. You've already talked to the SEC. I reached out this morning. Informal conversation. Establishing interest. They're very interested, but they need proof. They need documents. They need someone on the inside who can testify to the conversations that never got written down, the decisions made verbally, the instructions given with plausible deniability. You can give them that. I can give them everything. But only if I move first. Before Hale realizes I'm the leak. Before his lawyers can bury me in legal protection and NDAs and all the other tools people like him use to ensure loyalty. Robert closed the folder. What do you want from me? I want you to introduce me to whoever's handling this on the government side. I want to make my deal before the walls come down. And in exchange, I give you everything you need to make sure those walls come down hard and fast. How do I know you won't just take immunity and disappear? Leave us with nothing? Harris met his eyes. Because I'm not stupid. The only thing keeping me alive once this goes public is the value I provide. If I'm the cooperating witness who gave the government everything they needed to convict Victor Hale, I'm protected. If I'm the guy who tried to play both sides, I'm a liability to everyone. Robert stood. I'll make a call, but if you're playing me, if this is some setup to protect Hale or buy him time, you should know something. What's that? I've survived things that would have killed men with twice your training, in places where the rules you're used to playing by don't exist. So if you burn me, there won't be enough lawyers in this city to hide behind. Harris didn't flinch. I believe you, which is why I'm being straight with you. I want out. I want to survive. And the only way to survive is to make sure Hale doesn't. Robert left the office, called Kenneth on the way down. He's serious. You trust him? I trust that he's terrified, and that terrified people tell the truth when the truth is their only option. What do you need? A name at the SEC, someone who handles securities fraud, someone who can move fast. I know someone. Used to work with her back when I was still doing government contracts. She's aggressive, smart, hates corporate fraud with a passion that's almost religious. Set it up, today if possible. Kenneth was quiet for a moment. You know this is it, right? Once you connect Harris with the SEC, there's no pulling back. The investigation goes live. Hale gets wind of it. Everything accelerates. I know. And you're ready for that? Robert thought about the photograph, about Daniel at Margaret's apartment making cookies, about the promises he'd made and the life he was trying to protect. I'm ready. 6 hours later, Christopher Harris walked into a federal building downtown, met with an SEC attorney named Jessica Chen, sat in a conference room for 3 hours and told her everything. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the pattern of acquisitions and manipulations, the way Hale had used falsified documents and planted stories and carefully orchestrated crises to seize control of companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. By the time Harris walked out, the SEC had opened a formal investigation. Not public yet, not even whispered about in the circles where these things usually leaked, but live, active, with subpoena power and federal authority and all the machinery of government enforcement starting to turn. Robert didn't learn about this until later. He was at Amanda Farrow's classroom for a parent-teacher conference, the kind of ordinary, essential appointment he had protected in his calendar because it mattered, because Daniel's education mattered, because being a present father meant showing up for the small things that other parents treated as optional. Amanda was young, maybe 29. with the particular warmth of someone who had genuinely encountered something worth noticing. Daniel is one of the most naturally empathetic children I've taught. He has a quality of paying attention to other people that's unusual in second grade. Whatever you're doing at home, keep doing it. Robert sat in a chair designed for a child and listened to his son's teacher talk about the person Daniel was becoming. Thoughtful, kind, curious. The kind of kid who noticed when other children were sad and asked if they were okay. He talks about you a lot, about the things you do together, the museum, the pancakes, the conversations about dinosaurs and dogs and whether water molecules remember being rain. He has theories about everything. He gets that from you, I think, the way you approach the world. He feels safe asking questions because you treat them seriously. That's a gift. Robert drove home from the school thinking about gifts, about what you gave your children and what they gave back, about the transaction of trust that happened every time Daniel looked at him and believed the promises being made. His phone rang. Stephen Taylor. It's live. Posted 20 minutes ago. Independent platform. Every document. Every connection. The complete story of how Victor Hale systematically dismantled companies and destroyed lives for profit. How's it spreading? Fast. Twitter's on fire. Financial blogs are picking it up. I'm getting calls from producers. This is going to be everywhere by tonight. Good. Good? Robert, I just ended my career at The Observer. Probably ended my career in mainstream journalism, period. Good? You told the truth. The rest is just noise. Taylor laughed, bitter but genuine. I hope you're right. That night, after Daniel was asleep in his own bed after a day of cookies and reassurance and normalcy, Robert sat at his kitchen table and read Stephen Taylor's story, all 4,200 words of it, the careful documentation, the clear prose, the devastating accumulation of evidence that took Victor Hale's carefully constructed empire and showed it for what it was, a house built on other people's ruins. By morning, 3 board members had called their attorneys. By afternoon, 2 had called Elizabeth Morgan. Robert's phone rang at 7 p.m. Elizabeth's voice was steadier than he'd heard it in days. They want to talk. 2 board members. They've read the story. They have questions about the filing, about Hale's role, about whether they've been complicit in something they didn't understand. What did you tell them? I told them the truth, that I was set up, that the filing was altered, that Hale orchestrated my removal because I was the only thing standing between him and complete control. Did they believe you? I think they want to believe me, but they're scared. These are people who've built careers on being careful, on not making mistakes that end up in federal investigations. Tell them they have a choice. They can be careful and complicit, or they can be brave and clean. Is that what you told yourself when you decided to go after Hale? Robert was quiet for a moment. I told myself that my son deserves to grow up in a world where powerful men face consequences, where the truth matters more than who can afford better lawyers. That's not bravery. It's just refusing to accept that power means being untouchable. Elizabeth was silent. Then, the board meeting is in 2 days, Thursday, 9 a.m. Hale will present his restructuring plan. Unless something changes between now and then, he wins. Something will change. How can you be sure? Because the story is out, because the SEC is investigating, because Christopher Harris is cooperating, because every piece is in motion and Hale can't stop them all. And if he tries, then he proves everything we've said about him. They hung up. Robert checked on Daniel. The boy was deeply asleep, one arm around his stuffed dog, face peaceful, trusting that tomorrow would be safe because Dad had said so. Robert stood in the doorway and felt the weight of that trust, the responsibility of it, the absolute necessity of being worthy of it. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You should have taken my advice. What happens next is on you. Robert deleted the message, turned off his phone, sat in the darkness of his living room, and thought about what came next. Thursday morning arrived with surprising normalcy. Sunrise at the usual time, traffic following its predictable patterns, the city waking up and going about its business as if nothing important was about to happen in a conference room on the 14th floor of Morgan Tower. Robert dropped Daniel at school. Regular schedule, back to normal. The threat that had felt so immediate 3 days ago now diminished by the momentum of everything in motion. Hale had bigger problems than a janitor's son. He drove to Morgan Tower, parked in a public lot 3 blocks away, walked to the building in civilian clothes, dark slacks, button-down shirt, the kind of outfit that made him invisible in a different way. Not the uniform of pro-clean, the uniform of 1,000 other men moving through a downtown morning. The lobby was different now. He saw it with new eyes, not as someone who cleaned it, but as someone who understood its true function. The projection of power, the architectural announcement of importance, the marble and glass saying, "We are significant and you should remember it." He took the elevator to the 14th floor. Elizabeth had left his name with security. He was cleared to attend as an observer, not to speak, not to participate, just to be present when the board made its decision. The conference room was everything he expected. Long table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the harbor, 9 board members already seated. Elizabeth at one end, Victor Hale at the other. Hale looked exactly like his voice had sounded on the phone. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit worn with the ease of someone for whom expensive suits were routine. He glanced at Robert as he entered, registered his presence with a slight narrowing of the eyes, then dismissed him. Mistake. The board chair, a woman named Margaret Chen, called the meeting to order. "We have several items on today's agenda, but given recent events, I think we need to address the article that was published yesterday, the allegations made against this board and specifically against Mr. Hale." Hale leaned forward. "If I may, Margaret, that article is a hit piece. Unverified allegations from questionable sources with an obvious axe to grind. My attorneys are already preparing defamation suits against the publication and the individuals involved. Your attorneys can prepare whatever they like, but this board has a fiduciary duty to investigate credible allegations of fraud, and these allegations are credible. Based on what? The word of a disgraced former assistant? A janitor with a grudge? A journalist desperate for attention?" Elizabeth spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Based on documentation, bank records, email trails, testimony from your own security director currently cooperating with the SEC. Would you like me to continue?" The room went very still. Hale's expression didn't change. "Christopher is cooperating with no one. He works for me. His loyalty is absolute. He worked for you. Past tense. He's currently in federal custody, providing evidence about every transaction he helped structure over the last 6 years, every offshore account, every shell company, every fraudulent filing." Margaret Chen looked at Hale. "Is this true?" "I have no knowledge of any cooperation with federal authorities." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can provide without consulting my legal team." "Then consult them. This meeting is in recess for 30 minutes. Hale stood, walked to the corner of the room, made a call. Robert could see his posture change as he spoke, the careful control starting to fracture. Elizabeth moved to where Robert stood by the window. "Thank you for being here. You're doing the work. I'm just watching." "You did more than watch. You built this. The evidence, the connections, the courage to stand in front of powerful men and call them liars." "I just told the truth." "That's what courage is. Telling the truth when the lies are more comfortable." The 30 minutes felt longer. Board members whispering to each other, attorneys on phones, the machinery of corporate governance grinding through a crisis it hadn't anticipated. When they reconvened, Hale looked smaller, still composed, still controlled, but diminished in a way that was hard to articulate but impossible to miss. Margaret Chen spoke. "Mr. Hale, I've been informed by our outside counsel that the SEC has indeed opened an investigation into Morgan Financial, into your business dealings, and into this board's potential exposure. In light of that investigation, I'm recommending that you step down from this board effective immediately." "You can't do that." "I can, and I am. You're welcome to fight it, to hire lawyers and file suits and do whatever wealthy men do when they don't get their way. But as of this moment, you no longer have a voice in this company's decisions." Hale looked around the table, counting votes, seeing the mathematics. You're making a mistake. All of you. I built this company. I made it valuable. Without me, it's nothing. Elizabeth stood. You didn't build this company. My father built it. I grew it. You just tried to steal it. There's a difference. The vote was 8-1. Hale's proxy voting against. Everyone else voting for his removal. He stood, gathered his papers with hands that were steady but slow, walked to the door, stopped, looked back at Robert. This isn't over. Robert met his eyes. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. Hale left. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Margaret Chen turned to Elizabeth. Ms. Morgan, I believe we owe you an apology, and more importantly, your position back, if you'll have it. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. Robert could see her processing, weighing, deciding what she actually wanted versus what she thought she was supposed to want. I'll have it, but not like before, not 70 hours a week and no life outside these walls. I'll run this company, I'll run it well. But I'll also live. There's a difference between success and sacrifice. I forgot that. I won't forget again. The board agreed, voted unanimously to reinstate her as CEO, effective immediately. Robert slipped out during the congratulations, took the elevator down, walked out of Morgan Tower into an October morning that felt lighter than when he'd entered. His phone buzzed. Kenneth. You see the news? What news? FBI just arrested Victor Hale at his home. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, the full menu. He's going to be in federal custody for the next however many months this takes to prosecute. Robert stopped walking, stood on the sidewalk while the city moved around him. That was fast. SEC doesn't mess around when they have cooperative witnesses and smoking gun documentation. They moved quick to make sure Hale couldn't destroy evidence or flee jurisdiction. Good. Good? Brother, you just took down one of the most powerful men in American finance. This is more than good. It's done. That's all I care about. He hung up, kept walking, found his car, drove to Daniel's school, parked in the pickup area 40 minutes early because he wanted to be there. Wanted to see his son emerge from that building. Wanted the confirmation that the world was still spinning and children were still learning, and some things remained untouched by the chaos adults created. When Daniel came out, backpack bouncing, face lit up with some story he was already preparing to tell, Robert felt something settle in his chest. The thing that had been tight since the photograph arrived, since Hale's voice on the phone, since the moment he'd understood that protecting Daniel meant fighting people who thought fighting back was impossible. Dad, guess what we learned about today? What? Metamorphosis. That's when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. It goes in a cocoon and it completely changes. Its whole body breaks down and rebuilds into something totally different. That sounds pretty amazing. It is. Mrs. Farrow said it's one of nature's most incredible transformations. She said sometimes things have to completely change to become what they're meant to be. They drove home. Daniel narrating theories about whether other animals could undergo metamorphosis if they tried hard enough. Robert listening and thinking about transformation, about how you broke down and rebuilt, about what emerged when the cocoon finally opened. That evening, Elizabeth called. Can I meet him? Your son, if you'd allow it. Robert thought about this, about whether he wanted his world and Daniel's world to intersect, about whether this woman who'd been a stranger and then a problem and then an ally belonged in the small, sacred space of his life with his son. Saturday, Natural History Museum. We're going to see the dinosaur exhibits. You're welcome to join us. I'd like that. Saturday arrived. Robert and Daniel took the bus downtown, met Elizabeth at the museum entrance. She was dressed differently than he'd seen before. Jeans, simple shirt, hair down, looking more like a person and less like a position. Daniel was initially shy. Then she asked him about Spinosaurus, and the shyness evaporated. They walked through the Cretaceous hall with Daniel explaining everything in the patient tone of an expert addressing eager students. Elizabeth listened, actually listened, not the way adults sometimes pretend to listen to children while thinking about other things, but with real attention, real curiosity, real engagement with the world as Daniel saw it. At the gift shop, Daniel found a small metal Spinosaurus. $11. He looked at his father with the expression Robert knew well. Hoping but not demanding, trusting but not presuming. Robert bought it. Daniel held it with both hands the whole bus ride home, studying it, narrating its imagined life under his breath, completely content. Elizabeth rode with them, got off at their stop, walked with them the 3 blocks to their building. "Would you like to come up? I could make coffee?" She looked at the building. Old brick. 4 stories. The kind of place that had witnessed generations. "I'd like that." They climbed to the 4th floor, entered the apartment. Daniel went immediately to his room to add Spinosaurus to his collection. Elizabeth stood in the small kitchen and looked around. "This is what a home looks like." "What do you mean?" "My apartment costs 20 times what yours does. It has a view and designer furniture and every appliance you could imagine. But it's not a home. It's a display. This is real." Robert made coffee. They sat at the table. The same table where he'd planned Hale's downfall, where he'd folded 32 drawings, where he'd done the arithmetic of survival night after night. "What happens now? For you?" "I go back to work, but differently. I already told the board. 50 hours a week maximum. No weekends unless it's an emergency. And I'm hiring a COO, someone who can handle the day-to-day so I can actually think strategically instead of just reacting constantly." "That's good." "It's necessary. I almost lost everything because I forgot what everything actually meant. The company, the title, the success. I thought that was everything. But it's not. It's just noise. The real things are smaller, quieter. A conversation at a kitchen table, a child excited about a toy dinosaur, being present for someone who needs you there." Daniel emerged from his room, sat down at the table, placed Spinosaurus in front of him. "Can we go to the park?" Robert looked at Elizabeth. "We usually walk to the park on Saturday afternoons. There's one near the river. Nothing fancy, just slides and swings and usually a few dogs." "I know a good one near the river," Elizabeth offered, then smiled. "Actually, I don't. I've lived in this city 15 years and I don't know any of the parks. But I'd like to learn." They walked together, Daniel between them, the boy holding his father's hand and explaining to Elizabeth about the difference between carnivorous and herbivorous dinosaurs and why it mattered for their hunting strategies. The park was exactly what Robert had described: modest, well-used, a few other families, dogs, the simple infrastructure of ordinary life. Daniel ran to the swings. Robert and Elizabeth sat on a bench. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing what I couldn't see. For fighting when I was too defeated to fight. For showing me what actually matters. You would have figured it out. Maybe, eventually, but you gave me a shortcut. And more than that, you gave me an example of what it looks like to be good at being human. Not good at business, not good at winning, good at being a person worth knowing." Robert watched Daniel on the swings, the boy pumping his legs, building momentum, face bright with the simple physics of motion. "I didn't do anything special. I just refused to accept that power means being untouchable. That's not courage. It's just basic decency." They sat in silence for a while, watching Daniel play, watching other children chase each other, watching dogs being walked and couples holding hands in all the unremarkable beauty of a Saturday afternoon in a city park. 6 months later, they were family. Not in any way that could be easily categorized or explained, but family nonetheless. Elizabeth came to Sunday dinners, helped with homework, learned to make pancakes under Daniel's exacting supervision. Robert went back to work. Not cleaning buildings. Elizabeth had offered him a position at Morgan Financial, corporate security, the kind of job that paid well and used his actual skills, but he'd turned it down, taken a different job instead, building maintenance at Daniel's school. Day shift, weekends off, home every afternoon when his son got out of class. Victor Hale went to trial, was convicted on 17 counts, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, his empire dismantled, his wealth seized, his name a cautionary tale about what happened when you believed your own mythology. Christopher Harris testified against him, walked away with immunity and a new identity somewhere, The reach of powerful men didn't extend. Stephen Taylor won a Pulitzer for investigative journalism, for the story that had ended his career at The Observer and started a new one built on truth instead of institutional approval. And on a Tuesday morning in spring, Robert Williams sat at his kitchen table making Daniel's lunch while his son got ready for school. The apartment was the same, 4th floor, old building, the smell of other people's cooking in the hallway. But everything was different. Daniel came to the kitchen, backpack ready, shoes tied. "Dad, can we get a dog now?" Robert looked at his son, 7 years old going on 8, growing, changing, becoming. "Not yet, but soon, when we move." "We're moving?" "In a few months. Elizabeth found a place, has a yard, 3 bedrooms. She's helping with the down payment." "Is she moving with us?" Robert had been waiting for this question, preparing for it, knowing it would come eventually. "Would you want her to?" Daniel thought about this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "I think so. She's nice, and she listens when I talk about dinosaurs, and she's teaching me about the stock market, which is kind of boring but also kind of interesting." "Then yes, she'll be there too." "Cool. Can the dog sleep in my room?" "We'll see." They walked to school together. The morning routine unchanged, father and son, hand in hand, the world still spinning, still full of challenges and uncertainties and all the complicated difficulty of being alive, but also full of simple joys, of pancakes and dinosaurs and someday promises that were slowly becoming today realities. At the school gate, Daniel turned back. "Dad?" "Yeah? You're a good dad." Robert felt it hit him, the weight and gift of it, the trust. "Thank you, buddy." "You're welcome." Daniel ran into the building, backpack bouncing, head turning to look at everything because the world was still interesting and he hadn't learned to stop looking. Robert stood at the gate and watched until he couldn't see him anymore, then walked back to the apartment where Elizabeth was waiting with coffee and a smile and the newspaper spread out on the table. They sat together, talked about nothing important, made plans for the weekend, discussed what color to paint Daniel's new bedroom. And somewhere in the quiet ordinariness of that morning, Robert understood what he'd been fighting for all along. Not revenge, not victory, not even justice, though justice had been necessary. He'd been fighting for this, for the right to live a small, unremarkable life, to raise his son in a world where dignity mattered, where truth had weight, where power meant responsibility instead of immunity. Some men spent their whole lives waiting to be seen. Robert Williams had simply decided to be worth seeing. And in the end, the world had caught up with him.